Paintings, monuments, and written accounts have long been used in history to capture the faces of the past. What if, however, contemporary science could provide the actual appearance of these historical figures? The real faces of people like Cleopatra, George Washington, and even William Shakespeare have been recreated by experts using cutting-edge forensic reconstruction and artificial intelligence technologies. The outcomes? Well, some are well-known, others contradict our preconceived notions. Have we been imagining history incorrectly? Come discover the fantastic, scientifically supported metamorphosis of 50 iconic figures. You won't believe who doesn't resemble their well-known images. Henry IV of France. From 1589 until his assassination by a fervent Catholic in 1610, Henry IV of France ruled France. Because of his deep concern for his subjects' well-being, he was often referred to as Good King Henry. Philip Frosch produced a CGI 3D forensic facial reconstruction using Henry's skull as a foundation. Meritamun. Meritamun, a 2,000-year-old mummy, was revived with modern technologies. Researchers from the University of Melbourne utilized Meritamun's skull to establish that she was anemic between the ages of 18 and 25 and roughly 5 feet 4 inches tall. Since the remainder of her corpse was never found, they were unable to determine the cause of death. The researchers employed forensic science, computed tomography or CAT scanning, 3D printing, Egyptology, medical research, and art to rebuild Meritamun's face. 500-year-old Dubliner. Archaeologists discovered the remains of a man who died approximately 500 years ago, back in 2014. He was one of 4 sets of remains found, and they all appeared to have been impoverished based on their severe manual labor and indications of starvation as children. They used one of the well-preserved skulls to reconstruct the man's appearance from 500 years ago. Nicolaus Copernicus. Polish archaeologists discovered remains in a church in 2004, but no grave monument was found. They transported the skeleton to forensic scientists in Warsaw since they were unsure of its identity. After reconstructing the face, they discovered an elderly guy with a scar over his brow and a broken nose. The characteristics and the skeleton's age indicate that Nicolaus Copernicus was a well-known astronomer. The striking resemblance between his photograph and the 3D image is evident when you place them. Modern scientists would never have learned who he was without this new technology. Church was cautious about burying him where he was discovered because of his well-known achievements. His remains might not have been identified in the absence of this technology. Johann Sebastian Bach. Considered one of the greatest composers of all time, Johann Sebastian Bach was a Baroque composer and pianist. Scottish anthropologist Caroline Wilkinson measured the composer's facial bones to produce a 3-dimensional representation of Bach's face. Early Neolithic Stonehenge Man. The skull of an early Neolithic man was reconstructed based on the skeleton of an adult male unearthed in Winterbourne, Stoke, Wiltshire in 1863. Experts utilized skeletal analysis to reconstruct the appearance of a lean man in his 40s around 5,500 years ago, 500 years before the construction of the first monument at Stonehenge. Jane of Jamestown. When Jane was 14, her fellow Jamestown immigrants from the 17th century devoured her. In 2012, her severed limb bone and disfigured cranium were discovered in a Jamestown cellar along with other food remnants and butchered animal bones. After examining the bones, Dr. Douglas Owsley, chief forensic anthropologist at the National Museum of Natural History at the Smithsonian Institution, concluded that the incisions and scratches were caused by an attempt to extract the brain and tissue from the bones. Owsley concluded that it was cannibalism because the marks were in line with other cannibalism cases and the fact that Jamestown residents were going hungry in the winter of 1609 to 1610. King Tut's biological mother, likely Nefertiti. According to DNA studies, a mummy known as the Younger Lady is the mother of Tutankhamun and the sister of Tut's father, Akhenaten. Although the remains' identity is still unknown, Many people think they're those of Queen Nefertiti, Akhenaten's great royal wife. The scan of the younger lady was utilized by paleo artist Elizabeth Danes to recreate the Egyptian queen's bust. Maximilien de Robespierre. French lawyer and politician Maximilien de Robespierre is most remembered for his involvement in the Reign of Terror and the French Revolution. At the age of 36, he was put to death by guillotine on July 28, 1794. Scientists were able to rebuild Robespierre's visage and identify the diseases he had by using his death mask and historical documents that described his medical history. Vision issues, nose bleeding, he covered his pillow with fresh blood each night, jaundice, yellow-colored skin and eyes, asthenia, continuous tiredness, recurrent leg ulcers, and frequent skin diseases of the face linked to scars from a prior smallpox infection were among the clinical signs that contemporary witnesses described. Historians think that he had sarcoidosis. He also twitched his tongue and eyes all the time. The years 1790 to 1794 saw a worsening of symptoms. Robespierre was shot in the jaw under suspicious circumstances the day before he was beheaded. Richard III of England. From 1483 to 1485, Richard III ruled England as king. He played a significant role in the Battle of Bosworth Field, where he lost his life, and the War of Roses. This was the final major battle between the York and Lancaster dynasties. When he passed away, he was 32. After being thought to have been dumped into the River Soar, his bones were lost for over 5 centuries before being found in a Leicester City Council parking lot in 2012. They recreated a 3D construction of his face using the skull and DNA samples. Muscle tissue was added to the skin scan using a computer program, and the outcome was then turned into a plastic model. Context 958. The experts who have pieced together this man's life and face by examining his bones and teeth have given him the nickname Context 958. He lived 700 years ago. Context 958 is a component of a more extensive study conducted by the University of Cambridge that aims to comprehend medieval life and death. According to research team member John Robb, Context 958 was probably an inmate at the Hospital of St. John, a charitable institution which provided food and a place to live for a dozen indigent townspeople. Based on the wear and tear signs of his skeleton, the team had also concluded that he had a hard-working life and was approximately 40 years old when he passed away. Anthony of Padua. Born in Lisbon, Portugal in 1195, Saint Anthony of Padua was a Catholic priest from a prosperous family. He passed away in Padua, Italy at the age of 35. Anthony was one of the most swiftly canonized saints in church history, as his contemporaries acknowledged his love and commitment to the sick and impoverished and his potent sermons. He is the patron of misplaced items. Together, forensic experts from the University of St. Anthony of Padua were able to reconstruct his face from a digital replica of his skull in 2014, in what they consider one of the most faithful reconstructions of the face of St. Anthony. They created Anthony's characteristics using the most recent 3D software. Mary, Queen of Scots. Between 1542 and 1567, Mary Stuart ruled Scotland as queen. She took the throne at the age of 6 days. After being held captive by Queen Elizabeth of England for the final 18 years of her life, Mary was executed in 1586 after being found guilty of conspiring to kill Elizabeth. When she was executed, she was 44 years old. To produce a 3D representation of Mary Stuart's appearance during her reign, experts from the University of Dundee collected all of the portraits of the Queen that were accessible. Arish. Arish was between 19 and 24 years old when he passed away 2,500 years ago in Carthage, which is now Tunisia. Researchers recreated Arish's appearance during his lifetime using dermoplasty and criminal investigative methods. A medieval maiden from Edinburgh. This woman is one of 400 individuals discovered in the graveyard of South Leith Parish Church, which was dug up in 2009 as part of the Edinburgh trams preparations. They were created in the 16th century. After examining the remains, experts concluded that she was between 25 and 35. She was 4 feet 11 inches tall, 4 centimeters less than the typical height of a medieval woman in the discovered population. The Mary Rose Archer. In 1545, Mary Rose, a warship in King Henry VIII's English Tudor Navy, went down while spearheading an assault on the French fleet. The ship and most of her crew were retrieved 500 years later, and scientists analyzed the remains. Even though it was challenging to examine the bones due to algae and other developments, the research team discovered a significant number of this specific archer. They assessed his height of 6 feet and his function on board as a man with a longbow. They also produced a 3D model of his skull to rebuild his face. Robert Burns. Works like Auld Lang Syne and the Battle of Shirramir are attributed to Scottish poet and lyricist Robert Burns. He passed away in Dumfries, Scotland at the age of 37 in 1796. Researchers created a 3D replica of his cranium to bring Burns back to life. John de Strivelyn. A Scottish knight from the Middle Ages, John de Strivelyn, sometimes called John Stirling, passed away in 1378. His remains were discovered beneath a forgotten royal chapel from the 12th century at Stirling Castle. The University of Dundee worked on his remains to generate a 3-dimensional representation of his appearance. A medical artist painted the finished product using the most recent digital scanning and duplication techniques. Robert the Bruce. In addition to being one of the most well-known fighters of his day, Robert I ruled Scotland from 1306 until he died in 1329. During the First War of Scottish Independence, he led armies against England and restored Scotland's independence. In Scotland, Robert the Bruce is still considered a national hero. Since there were very few visual representations of the king, historians from the University of Glasgow and John Moores University in Liverpool collaborated in 2016 to rebuild Robert's face. They created a 3D model using casts from what is thought to be Robert's skull. Historians are pretty straightforward that the skull is that of King Robert, notwithstanding some doubts regarding whether it belongs to him. King Tut. The renowned young pharaoh who ruled Egypt from 1334 to 1324 BC is well known for ascending to power at the tender age of 9. To determine the actual appearance of the young ruler, archaeologist Howard Carter and other scholars used CAT, DNA testing, and thousands of digital scans. They discovered the reason for his death at the young age of 19. The infant pharaoh developed several illnesses and deformities as a result of all the inbreeding done to maintain the family bloodline pure. In addition to having a clubfoot, King Tutankhamun also had an overbite, malformed lips, and persistent malaria. Historians and scientists think he was constantly depicted sitting down because of his weakness. Emperor Nero. From 54 until 68 AD, Nero ruled as the Roman emperor. Among his numerous crimes were the chin-strap beard and the burning of Rome. This was Nero's appearance in those days. Take a look at the malevolent gaze. He certainly has the appearance of the insane, power-hungry, and murderous monarch we read about in our history books. Oh no! Julius Caesar. Julius, renowned for inventing the Caesar salad, has been portrayed in various ways throughout history. I'm joking. Caesar is well known for using his military prowess to extend the Roman Empire significantly. What did the honest Julius Caesar look like? We've all seen him looking good in ancient movies. It seems that he resembled our high school math teacher. Julius Caesar looked like this when he died on the notorious Ides of March. Cleopatra. Another historical figure who's been portrayed for a long time is Cleopatra. When she was 18, she and her brother, who was 10, took over Egypt. Julius Caesar was able to assist her in regaining her position of authority after she was expelled from Egypt. In honor of her brother Ptolemy, she gave birth to a son who is thought to be Caesar's. Did Elizabeth Taylor resemble Cleopatra in real life? We disagree, but you make the final decision. She has significantly more masculine traits than are shown. Queen Elizabeth I. Since her father, Henry VIII, had dissolved his marriage to her mother, Anne Boleyn, after having her decapitated, Queen Elizabeth I had a difficult time ascending to power. This renowned portrait was drawn when Elizabeth was 55, but the artist took some liberties in smoothing her skin because she was deemed illegitimate. After all, he had their marriage annulled. Shaw created a spooky robotic mask of her face in 2018. She appears older in the realistic portrayal, which is identical to the portrait. William Shakespeare. This man is well known to all of us. As the short-lived boy band LFO famously stated in their 1999 hit song Girls of Summer, Billy Shakespeare wrote a whole bunch of sonnets. However, we're unsure whether Shakespeare would have approved those stupid lyrics. We also don't know what the man looked like. The most famous portrait of the writing legend is the one shown above. Shakespeare's death mask was discovered in 1775 by Professor Hildegard Hammerschmidt Hummel. In 2010, Dr. Carolyn Wilkinson created this depiction of the man's appearance after examining the death mask. He appears pretty serious, but what can you expect from someone who wrote tragedies like Hamlet and Romeo and Juliet? George Washington. Reconstructing President George Washington's face without bones was thought to be practically difficult. However, Jeffrey Schwartz, a forensic anthropologist from the University of Pittsburgh, was up to the task. Among the primary objects Schwartz employed were a bust of Washington's visage, statues, and life mask. To identify the facial similarities, he analyzed several pictures of George Washington that had been painted over the years. Instead of portraying George Washington as an elderly president, Schwartz aimed to capture him in his youth. Thus, the final product is a wax figure that allows us to see his appearance. The Lord of Sipan. Among the first Moche mummies found in Peru in 1987 was the Lord of Sipan. Like the pharaohs and queens of Egypt, the Lord of Sipan was interred amidst riches. Archaeologists had to put together a skull that had fractured into 96 pieces, so it was a little tricky to get the Lord of Sipan's visage right. However, they performed well with this representation of the Lord of Sipan. The elaborate headpiece and jewelry are a stylish addition. Simón Bolívar. A military leader from Venezuela named Simón Bolívar was instrumental in the uprising against the Spanish Empire. He soon became entangled in the resistance after being sent to Spain for a study. What was the actual appearance of the man they call El Liberator? This recreation's creators claim it resembles a young, attractive Venezuelan, Abe Lincoln. What led to his fatal demise? TB is an unfortunate disease. The Lady of Cow. In 2005, the enigmatic Moche mummy of the Lady of Cow was found. She's thought to have died in her mid-20s in the year 400. These images show the altered and clothed remains of the Lady of Cow. It's fascinating and eerie. Although the exact cause of her death and the reason she passed away at such a young age are unknown, the way she was buried leads archaeologists and researchers to believe that she may have been the victim of a human sacrifice. Saint Nicholas. We're all familiar with good Saint Nick. Many people are unaware that Santa Claus was modeled after a real saint who was well known for his generosity and gift-giving. His custom of putting candy in children's shoes gave rise to modern Christmas customs. He had incredible influence. However, he also had a completely different appearance from what we've been told. Saint Nick has experienced whitewashing, much like our friend Jesus. Like Jesus, Saint Nicholas had a brown complexion since he was from Turkey, but apparently the beard was real. Giovanni Battista Sidotti. A Christian missionary named Giovanni Battista Sidotti was committed to evangelizing Japan. He intended to pose as a samurai soldier to get the message out. Unfortunately, he was quickly recognized as an alien by real samurai soldiers and imprisoned for the remainder of his life. He's frequently referred to as the last missionary. In 2014, his remains were discovered almost undamaged, and forensic anthropologists were able to reconstruct his appearance. The Mycenaean Griffin Warrior. 2015 saw the discovery of the Mycenaean Griffin Warrior in a Bronze Age tomb dated 1450 BC. He was buried with more than 14,000 items, and his skeleton remained undamaged. Archaeologists learned more about him from the writing on the tomb walls. According to his bones, the Mycenaean Griffin Warrior looked like this. His height of 5'5" would have been considered substantial at the time. Given the setting, the era, and the combs discovered in his tomb, It's presumed that he had long hair. Slonk Hill Man. The Slonk Hill Man probably had black eyes, hair, and a lighter complexion. This Iron Age man, known as the Slonk Hill Man, was found not far from Brighton, UK, buried in a crouch and resting on a thick layer of barnacles and mussel shells. He lived between 2,400 and 2,200 years ago. Ancient Wari Queen. Among many opulent treasures, the Pyramid El Castillo de Huarme in North Lima, Peru, contained the skull of a Wari queen who lived approximately 1,200 years ago. The bones of 58 noble women were interred in the remainder of the tomb, while the Wari queen was buried in a special room. They belonged to the Wari culture, which flourished in the area starting in 700 AD to 1000 AD. The queen's skull served as the model for the modeling clay reconstruction. White Hawk Woman. The White Hawk Woman, named for the English town of Whitehawk where she was discovered, lived approximately 5,500 years ago and seems to have perished during childbirth. Even for a Neolithic lady, she was short, being 4 foot 9 inches tall. Lucky charms that were said to ward off evil were interred to her. Ava. The remains of a woman who passed away 4,250 years ago were found in 1987 in Achavanich in Caithness, UK. Since they could not know who she was, the body was given the nickname Ava. Based on the DNA, she was derived from mainland Europeans who had immigrated to England just a few generations before her birth. She had blue eyes and red hair when the researchers created a 3D model of her. According to an additional genetic study by Harvard Medical School and the Natural History Museum in London, she would have had darker hair and eyes. Like the Cheddar Man, early Europeans did not resemble modern-day British people. The evidence collected from Ava intrigues scientists because it suggests that humans were leaving mainland Europe far earlier than previously believed. Caligula. The Roman soldiers nicknamed Gaius Caesar Augustus Germanicus Caligula, meaning little boot. The third Roman emperor was Caligula. Because he rose to power following the passing of his father, he did so at the age of just 20. Sadly, inherited authority is frequently unmerited. He's known for being a sexual sadist, a terrible tyrant, and an all-around awful guy, considered Joffrey from Game of Thrones. As a result, his reign was short, just about 4 years. Numerous pictures, statues, and busts captured Caligula's attractive features. Therefore, it was straightforward to obtain a decent sense of his appearance. Artist Dan Vauchart utilized a bust of Caligula to depict what he would have looked like in real life, which looks just like him. Roman Emperor Macrinus. The Roman Empire was ruled by Macrinus from 217 until 218. The majority of contemporary representations of Macrinus portray him as white. However, according to history, Macrinus was North African, and his records indicate he was Moorish by race. European people of African heritage are frequently referred to as Moors. Dan Vauchart, a digital artist, is well known for his remarkable lifelike representations of Roman emperors based on actual monuments. Even though no one has portrayed Macrinus as black before, he chose to do so after researching the character. Vauchart acknowledges on his Twitter account that this is his artistic interpretation. Still, he notes that his busts and coin depictions feature African features like thick hair and a wide nose. Giovanni Segantini. Italian painter Giovanni Segantini, born in 1858, is renowned for his expansive divisionist and symbolist landscape paintings. He worked in the Swiss Alps for a large portion of his career, where he honed his unique style, which is distinguished by vivid colors and vigorous brushstrokes. Segantini frequently painted pastoral and alpine landscapes with philosophical and spiritual undertones. Despite his achievements, he focused on nature and art and led a pretty solitary life. He passed away in the mountains close to Pontresina in 1899 while completing his last grand opus, the Triptych of Nature. The Stonehenge Man. You'll see this wax figure known as the Stonehenge Man if you ever have the opportunity to visit the Visitor Center at Stonehenge. His cranium was removed from 5,500-year-old remains discovered close to the well-known stone monument. In theory, he would have been born some 500 years before Stonehenge was built. He would have traveled a great deal when he was younger, based on evidence found on the remains. Like most English people, Stonehenge man seems pale and has light eyes in this representation. We can presume that people's complexion became paler over 5,000 years of adapting to England's lack of sunlight, given that the DNA revealed that Cheddar Man had dark skin. Emperor Marcus Salvius Otho. Marcus Otho and Caesar Augustus, often known as Emperor Otho, governed Rome for about 3 months. He was the second ruler in the well-known Year of 4 Emperors. Otho was a close companion of Emperor Nero and was born into an aristocratic Etruscan family. Despite his brief reign over the empire, his likeness remains on busts. Based on Otho's bust, an artist named Hieronymus produced a remarkable and remarkably lifelike visage. Otzi the Iceman. Hikers in the Alps discovered the frozen remains of an ancient skeleton in 1991. The figure was dubbed Otzi the Iceman by archaeologists, who determined that he lived 5,300 years ago. Otzi, however, survived the cold. He was killed by being shot in the back with an arrow. He was wearing a leather coat, and his body was so well preserved that they could still see the 60 tattoos covering it. Scientists could create a 3-dimensional or 3D model of his appearance in life since his entire body was preserved. Octavian Augustus. Due to the assassination of his great-uncle, Julius Caesar, Octavian Augustus became the ruler. In most cases, inheriting power is not a good idea, but Augustus was adored by the Roman populace. Until he died in 14 AD, he remained in power. Known as the Pax Romana, this era was the most tranquil in the history of the empire. He's been honored with several busts and statues because of his contributions to the Republic's success. Caesaris de Roma is a collection of sculptures depicting Roman emperors made by Salvo Ruano. One of the realistic sculptures depicting the possible appearance as a young man is this one. Queen Anne Boleyn. Henry VIII's second wife, Queen Anne Boleyn, has been the subject of controversy over the years due to different artistic renderings of her features. Because it most closely resembles the Moest Hoppe Award, some historians have asserted that Nid Hall's portrayal of her is most realistic. The wax figure of Anne Boleyn, on exhibit at Hever Castle, was made by an artist by the name Emily Pooley. After months of research, Pooley produced her dissertation about Anne's appearance in historical writings. According to these, she has an oval face, olive skin, and black hair. Additionally, Emmy concluded that Holbein's sketch was the most exact and accurate to the data. They used 360-degree photos to obtain a base construction after Emily Pooley selected a model that looked as close to the concept as feasible. She then modified it with the Holbein sketch. Napoleon Bonaparte. The former French Emperor Napoleon Bonaparte is a name almost everyone has heard of. From 1804 to 1814, and then for a brief period again in 1815, he reigned. We genuinely know exactly what he looked like since a face mask was taken of him after he passed away. This visage, which resembles several of his portraits quite a bit, has been produced by artists. This image provides an accurate representation of a person's appearance, even though it isn't as precise as some of the recreations created from the skulls of the deceased. This is a mold made from the person's face, after all. Photoshop could create similar 3D models for almost any death mask. His death mask is the subject of much debate, though, and some individuals think reproductions are false. The mummy of an Egyptian toddler. A toddler who died in the 1st century AD was mummified and interred in Egypt. Egyptian customs dictated that an artist create a portrait of him when he was still living. This was affixed to the mummy itself and was part of the burial. Even though this narrative is tragic, it still provides important information about a little-known aspect of ancient Egypt. In a Smithsonian magazine piece, they clarified that the portraits on mummies don't always correspond. For instance, at 20, an old man was discovered holding a photograph of himself as he appeared in his best years. However, this 3D face was created by rebuilding his skull without referencing the painting. The outcome was remarkably similar. Frederic Chopin. Frederic Chopin was a well-known pianist and composer. Even those unfamiliar with Chopin's music may be able to identify portions due to its immense popularity. To be fair, at least one image of the older Frederic Chopin is included. His arrival was therefore not entirely mysterious. Nonetheless, his youthful look is consistently shown in the painting. When he passed away, a mold of his face and hands was taken because of his enormous reputation. Hadi Karimi, a visual artist from Iran, took the extant pictures and photographs of Chopin. He spent much time and energy figuring out what Chopin might have looked like. Because his eyes encapsulate the essence of his music, the outcomes are stunning. Lilus AI. For ages, older women were accused of witchcraft, and Lilus AI was no different. When she was tried for witchcraft, she was an old woman in Scotland. She had to admit to being in love with the devil as a result of the torment she received from the residents of her community. Before they could burn her at the stake after she was found guilty, she killed herself in 1704. She was buried on the beach after passing away. Because they thought she would use her magic to resurrect from the dead, the villagers erected a massive slab of stone on top of her grave. This stone slab sufficiently preserved her skeleton so that Dundee University forensic experts could recreate a three-dimensional replica of her appearance in her prime. The Woman in the Statue of Liberty. Dutch artist Bas Antwerwick made the computerized picture to depict what the Statue of Liberty might have looked like if she'd been a real French lady. But is this all true? And was she real? It was well known that Frederic Auguste Bartholdi was captivated by Egyptian architecture. At first, he intended to make a statue for the opening of the Egyptian Suez Canal that was almost exactly like the Statue of Liberty. Initially, he designed the figure to be an Arab woman with a torch over her head, dressed in a peasant robe. Historians think Bartholdi handed the United States his existing project because the concepts were almost identical. The Statue of Liberty might not have been the only figure on this list whose race has been altered numerous times. Philip the Arab's facial reconstruction captures his emotions. Philip the Arab was the Roman emperor from 244 to 249. He negotiated peace with the Persian Sassanid Empire, which made him an influential person in the Roman Empire. After being betrayed during the Battle of Verona, he was slain in a mutiny. He only ruled for 5 years, yet his achievements during that little period will live on in his memory. Artist Dan Vauchart has created yet another artistic interpretation with his facial replica. Except for his mournful expression and the sensation of betrayal in his eyes, his face and breasts appear to be the same. We can truly feel what Philip must have gone through because of his artwork. If you've watched the video till here, that means you've enjoyed the video. Subscribe. Don't forget to turn on the notifications bell icon